Everything you are about to hear is based on verified reporting from named, credentialed, on-the-record sources, including law enforcement officials, retired federal agents, prosecutors, and investigative journalists. Analytical conclusions are presented as analysis, not established fact. Single-source claims are clearly attributed. No individual is named as a suspect. The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie is ongoing. If you have information, contact 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's non-emergency line at 5203-14900. Day 61. 61 days since Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, mother of NBC, today, co-anchor Savannah Guthrie vanished from her Catalina Foothills home in Tucson, Arizona in the middle of the night. 61 days of a family recording video messages to a kidnapper, of a reward pool growing past $1 million, of FBI agents and forensic labs and reporter stakeouts and community investigators working every angle they have. 61 days and still no arrest, still no publicly named suspect, not one. Let me tell you why I keep coming back to this case. It is not because of who Nancy is related to. It is not because of the television connection. It is because of what is happening inside the system that is supposed to be finding her. And because what is happening inside that system right now in real time tells you something important about why 61 days have passed without an answer. The FBI has DNA. They have footage, they have the flower pots, they have contractor interviews running, and a former prosecutor, a man who spent decades inside courtrooms putting murderers away, walked onto camera this week and said something that has broken the internet in the last 24 hours. He did not hedge, he did not speculate, he did not say it's possible or we can't rule out. He made a bet, a specific, direct, confident bet. And he told us exactly where he thinks the person who took Nancy is right now. I'm not going to tell you what he said yet, because when you hear it, and you will hear it in full in this video, I need you to understand everything that built toward this moment first, because this statement does not exist in a vacuum. It connects to the DNA pipeline. It connects to the flower pots. It connects to Ashley Banfield's Day 60 contractor report. It connects to the collapse happening inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And when all of those pieces are in front of you at the same time, this man's words are going to hit you differently than any headline you have read this week. Stay with me. What the FBI has. Before we get into what happened this week, let me lay down the full evidence picture. If you have been with us since the beginning of this series, much of this will be familiar, but you need to hold all of it at the same time to understand why what we are about to discuss matters as much as it does. Nancy Guthrie was last seen at her home in Tucson's Catalina Foothills neighborhood on January 31st, 2026. She was reported missing the following morning, February 1st, when she did not appear at church. That absence was the alarm. People who knew Nancy have said it consistently. She did not miss church. When she was not there, something was wrong, and something was. The FBI believes she was abducted in the late night or early morning hours, bridging January 31st and February 1st. Blood was found on her front porch. Her back doors, two of them, a screen door and an interior door leading into the kitchen, were found standing open. So was her back gate. Now, on the surface, that might sound like she left or was taken in a hurry, or that the back was forced. But here is the detail that matters, and this is something Ashley Banfield broke through law enforcement sources on her Drop Dead Serious podcast around day 58 of the investigation. Those doors were not simply unlocked. They were not blown open by wind. They were propped open deliberately.
And the back doors were propped.
And what the suspect used to prop them? Nancy's own flower pots. Let that sit for a moment. This is a person who came to that property knowing what they were doing. They moved through the back of the home, located Nancy's flower pots, and used them to wedge open a screen door, an interior kitchen door, and a back gate. All three. All held open with her flower pots. Banfield's law enforcement source identified the back patio as the likely entry point. Banfield said on her podcast, and I am paraphrasing here, not quoting, that this detail floored her, that the suspect used Nancy's belongings to engineer his own access.
He took her beautiful flower pots and he propped open that screen door.
Retired SWAT Commander Bob Kriegier, who spent decades with the Pima County Sheriff's Department before retirement and appeared with Banfield specifically to analyze this detail, confirmed that the staging of those entry points is consistent with pre-planning. This was not improvised. Someone thought about how to get in, how to stay in control of multiple exits, and how to control the variables.
Yes and no, not really knowing why or who propped them open. But it would tell me that if it was the suspect who did it, they probably did it to have a quick avenue of egress to get out if something happened or went kind of against their plan.
Banfield also offered the analytical interpretation, which she labeled as such, that the propped back doors may have been intended as the exit route, but that Nancy's limited mobility may have complicated that plan and forced the suspect to bring her out through the front instead. Banfield further confirmed through what she described as a very high-level law enforcement source that multiple security cameras and lights around the property had been smashed. Not just one, multiple. This person came with an awareness of the security layout and neutralized it before doing anything else. Now let us talk about the man on the FBI footage. On February 12th, 11 days after Nancy was reported missing, the FBI released doorbell camera video. What you see is a masked figure outside Nancy's home on the night of her disappearance. The FBI released a profile, a male, approximately 5'9" to 5'10", with an average build. Dark clothing, black gloves, sneakers. He is wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack. He is visibly armed and wearing what appears to be a holster. At one point in the footage, the suspect uses shrubbery, the landscaping right there at the front door, to hide his face from the camera. Think about that. This person is at the front door, about to do something unthinkable to an 84-year-old woman in her own home, and he is pausing to use her own shrubbery to block the camera angle. That is not panic. That is composure. That is someone who has thought through what they are doing step by step. On February 13th, 12 days into the investigation, officials confirmed that DNA had been recovered at the property. Critically, that DNA does not belong to Nancy Guthrie. It does not belong to anyone close to her. Sheriff Nanos told CNN specifically that his lab had already excluded DNA belonging to Nancy herself, her family members, her landscaper, and her housekeeper. What remains is unidentified, non-household DNA at the scene of an abduction. That is significant. That is the kind of evidence that, if run against the right database, can end an investigation. And then there is the glove. A glove believed by investigators to match the type worn by the suspect in the FBI footage was recovered. It was found as far as 10 miles from Nancy's home. That glove is currently being tested for DNA, but here is where something went wrong in the process. And this is important because it connects directly to why this case may be stalled in a way that should not be happening. Brian Enton's reporting at News Nation revealed that the decision was made to send the glove to a private laboratory in Florida rather than routing it directly through FBI channels. The problem with that is straightforward. The FBI does not accept DNA submissions directly from private labs, so the process becomes a chain. The Florida lab tests the glove. That data then has to be sent back to Arizona's state system. From there, it has to be uploaded, verified, and then shared with the FBI for entry into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the National Criminal Database that law enforcement agencies across the country use to match DNA to known offenders. A source familiar with the investigation described this to News Nation as a catch-up process. That same source said the FBI could have processed and entered the data within a single day had it gone through proper federal channels from the start. Every day the DNA sits outside CODIS is a day that a potential match remains invisible. The Pima County Sheriff's Office has said, contrary to News Nation's reporting, that the FBI agreed to the private lab arrangement. That dispute over who made the call and why is still unresolved. What is not unresolved is this. There is DNA, there is a glove, there is a pipeline that experts say is slower than it needed to be. And there is a man on surveillance footage whose identity remains publicly unknown. Meanwhile, the Guthrie family has been holding together under circumstances that are almost impossible to imagine. Savannah Guthrie confirmed publicly that the family received credible ransom demands. They recorded video messages in response. They have said they are ready to talk. They have offered a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery. The FBI is separately offering up to $100,000. Between the family's reward, the FBI's reward, and Crime Stoppers' contributions, the total pool is now over $1.1 million. And still, as of today, April 2nd, no one has come forward with information that has produced a public arrest. 61 days in, over $1 million on the table, FBI DNA in a lab pipeline, and no arrest. The department in crisis. Now we need to talk about what is happening inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, because the Murphy statement, the one that has broken the internet, is not only about the suspect, it is about the system. And you cannot understand what Murphy is really saying without understanding what has happened inside the department running this investigation over the last 2 months. Sheriff Chris Nanos has been the public face of this case since day one. He is the elected sheriff of Pima County. At every press conference, every media interview, every public statement, Nanos has positioned himself as a man who stands by his team and his decisions. He told reporters directly, "I have no regrets about my team and their efforts." He called critics of his investigation Monday morning quarterbacks. He called their stories hit pieces. But in the last several weeks, a picture has emerged that is very different from the one Nanos has painted. And it started with the crime scene. In the early days of the investigation, Sheriff Nanos personally ordered the crime scene at Nancy's Catalina Foothills home to be reopened. To understand why that matters, you need to hear from someone with authority on the subject. Dr. Richard Carmona is not a television commentator. He served as the 17th Surgeon General of the United States. Before that, he spent 30 years working within the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He knows this department. He knows how crime scenes are supposed to be handled. And when Brian Enton of News Nation put the question to him, Carmona did not soften his answer. Carmona said, "Once it has been corrupted, that's the end of it. You cannot reconstitute a crime scene." He pointed to footage of a pizza delivery vehicle crossing the front lawn of the property while the scene was still technically active, and he made the legal implication explicit. Any defense attorney, he said, could point to that contamination and use it to challenge the integrity of the physical evidence collected.
They have described them as being incompetent, because it is not the way an investigation should run.
A pizza delivery vehicle on an active crime scene lawn is not a minor administrative failure. It is potentially a case-altering one. Carmona was not the only credentialed voice to come out against Nanos. Nancy Grace, herself a former prosecutor with decades of experience in the American criminal justice system, went on Sean Hannity's podcast and called for Nanos to be removed from the case. She described the crime scene handling as the destruction of evidence. She said, by destroying the crime scene and by releasing the crime scene too early, they destroyed a lot of evidence. She rejected the word missteps as too mild. She called them screw-ups. And she said the FBI would not have done it this way. Now let us go deeper, because what happened to the crime scene in February is only the beginning. What came next is something that, in terms of institutional credibility, is almost without precedent. In December of 2025, before Nancy Guthrie was even reported missing, Sheriff Chris Nanos sat for a sworn deposition. The deposition was connected to a lawsuit filed by Aaron Cross, who serves as president of the Pima County Deputy Organization, the union representing more than 300 of Nanos's own deputies. Under oath, meaning with legal consequences for dishonesty, Nanos was asked directly whether he had ever been suspended during his law enforcement career. He said no. The Arizona Republic then published records from the El Paso Police Department in Texas showing that Chris Nanos had been suspended not once, not twice, 8 times. 8 separate suspensions between 1976 and 1982, totaling 37 days without pay. The offenses documented in those records are striking in their range. Excessive force, including one incident that drew a 15-day suspension after Nanos allegedly struck a suspect in the head hard enough that the individual required intensive care. Illegal gambling, insubordination, discharge of his firearm, making threats, dereliction of duty, misuse of a police siren, habitual tardiness, that is 8 suspensions, 37 days docked, across a 6-year period that ended not in retirement, not in a voluntary departure, but in a resignation in lieu of termination. The formal reasons documented on El Paso's records: insubordination and consistent inefficiency. He was going to be fired. He chose to resign instead. And then apparently, those 40-plus years passed without those records becoming part of his public biography in Arizona. When the Arizona Republic published the El Paso records, Nanos said he had interpreted the deposition question as applying only to his Pima County career. Pima County Supervisor Matt Hines said that explanation was disqualifying. His exact words: disqualifying for any county employee, but especially for one in law enforcement. Hines went further. He told the press that Nanos's entire 42-year career with the Pima County Department seems to be based on fraud. A sitting supervisor on the record about the sitting sheriff running a national kidnapping investigation. Then came March 24th. The Pima County Deputy Organization, representing over 300 deputies, the men and women who work under Nanos every single day, held a formal no-confidence vote. When the ballots were counted, 241 deputies voted no confidence and resigned, 65 abstained, 0 voted in favor of continued confidence in their sheriff. Not one. 0 out of 241 who voted chose to stand behind him. Union President Sergeant Aaron Cross went before the Board of Supervisors and said directly that Nanos has lost the faith of his deputies and the community. He asked the board to act. The Board of Supervisors responded. They voted unanimously to invoke Arizona Revised Statute 11-253, a law so old it dates to the territorial era before Arizona was even a state, and so rarely used that there is almost no modern case law to reference. That statute gives the board the authority to compel any county officer to provide reports under oath about their conduct and their department. If the officer refuses to comply within 10 days, the board can vote to vacate the seat. Supervisor Matt Hines said Nanos had betrayed the trust that our community placed in him. The April 7th board meeting is when the process either proves it has teeth or reveals it doesn't. There is also a recall effort. Former congressional candidate Daniel Gutierrez launched it on March 12th. Organizers need more than 122,000 valid signatures from Pima County voters by July 10th. Gutierrez has described it as a nonpartisan effort and said both Republican and Democratic voters have been signing it. And then, because apparently there is no bottom to this, on March 26th, the Tucson Police Department arrested a Pima County Sheriff's deputy on a kidnapping charge. The deputy is Travis Reynolds, 22 years old. Court documents say that Reynolds was transporting a handcuffed female.
A sheriff's deputy has been fired after being arrested on a kidnapping charge.
Detainee to Pima County Jail when he allegedly commented on her appearance, shared a vape pen with her, and told her they should go to a hotel and have sex. He allegedly showed her sexually explicit videos on his phone. He kept her inside the patrol vehicle for roughly an hour and 40 minutes before bringing her into the jail. Surveillance footage from inside the Pima County Jail facility confirmed portions of her account. In his own statement to investigators, Reynolds said he may or may not have discussed having sex with the detainee or shown her explicit material. A judge set his bond at $200,000, ordered him to stay away from the victim, and barred him from possessing weapons. Reynolds was fired. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for April 6th, the same day Savannah Guthrie returns to the Today Show. When reporters asked the Pima County Sheriff's Department whether Travis Reynolds had played any role in the Nancy Guthrie investigation before his termination, the department declined to comment. That is the department running this case, a sheriff who lied under oath about his own disciplinary record, a crime scene that a former U.S. Surgeon General called corrupted. A no-confidence vote from every deputy who cast a ballot, a board of supervisors invoking a territorial law, a recall effort in motion, and a fired deputy arrested on kidnapping charges whose connection to the Guthrie investigation the department will not address. So when a former prosecutor calls this a clown show, I want you to understand, that word is not theater. It is a clinical observation from someone who has spent decades watching institutions succeed and fail at the thing they are built to do. And this institution, right now, is failing. The contractor angle. On day 60 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, that is April 1st, the day before this video, Ashley Banfield released a new episode of Drop Dead Serious. And the angle she broke in that episode connects in a very direct way to the theory a former prosecutor is about to put on the table. Banfield reported that investigators are now actively pursuing a new line of inquiry. Contractors, subcontractors, and day laborers who may have had access to Nancy Guthrie's home or her Catalina Foothills neighborhood in the period before she disappeared. A source familiar with the investigation described the process of tracking these workers as, in their words, a mess. Let us think about what that investigative work actually looks like. The Catalina Foothills is a high-end residential neighborhood. Homes like Nancy's have regular maintenance schedules. Landscapers who come weekly, pool technicians, HVAC contractors, painters, roofers, handymen for small repairs. The neighborhood itself has utility crews, tree trimmers, construction workers on neighboring properties. Each of those contractors may have their own subcontractors. Some subcontractors hire day laborers, sometimes week to week, sometimes day to day, sometimes in cash. There are no employment records, no formal hiring documents, just a person who showed up, worked, and left. Tracking every one of those people, every person who might have walked past Nancy's gate, seen her back patio, noticed her camera positions, clocked the entry points, that is an enormous undertaking. And when a source with knowledge of the investigation calls it a mess, they are not exaggerating. They are describing what happens when you try to reconstruct a month or more of informal labor movement in a residential neighborhood. You end up with an enormous list of names, some of them incomplete, many of them overlapping, and no clear starting point. Banfield brought in retired detective Clint Cole to help analyze this angle. Cole helped solve the Nancy Woodrum case, and he spoke specifically about how law enforcement approaches contractor-heavy investigations. And the observation he made that stuck with me was this: in cases like this, investigators may have already spoken to the suspect, not because they identified him as a suspect, but because they knocked on every door, called every number, tracked down every worker they could find. And one of those workers may have been the person who took Nancy Guthrie. That person would have answered calmly, given their name, described their work, and law enforcement at that stage would have had no reason to hold them.
They have a right not to discuss it, even if they're not a suspect. They don't have to talk to us.
So what's your next step?
You have to try and get that information through other.
Now take that observation and hold it against what we know about the crime scene itself. The flower pots, the smashed cameras, the propped open back gate, the suspect who knew exactly where to stand to avoid the doorbell camera's angle. Someone knew the layout of that property, not from the street, not from a satellite map, but from being there, from walking back there, from working there, or near there, or for someone nearby. That level of familiarity does not come from a quick drive-by. It comes from time spent on or near that property. If the suspect is someone who worked in that neighborhood, someone who moved through it in a professional capacity before disappearing back into the informal labor market, then the investigative challenge is exactly as described: a mess, an enormous, cash-paid, non-documented mess of names and phone numbers and faces that investigators are still trying to untangle on day 61. And here is the piece that ties the contractor angle directly to the DNA evidence. If the person who took Nancy has a criminal record, if they have been through the Pima County system before, if their DNA profile exists somewhere in a database, then the glove currently being processed through a Florida lab and an Arizona state pipeline before it reaches CODIS is not just physical evidence. It is the thread that could unravel everything. The question is how long that thread takes to pull, which is exactly what a former prosecutor decided to answer this week. And his answer is about to change how you see this entire picture. Matt Murphy, the full reveal. Matt Murphy is a former prosecutor from Orange County, California. He is not a personality. He is not a commentator who parachutes into cases to offer hot takes. He is someone who spent years in a courtroom, working cases through the criminal justice system, presenting evidence to juries, understanding how investigations work and how they fail, and what a profile looks like when law enforcement has one, and what it means when they don't. He sat down with Joe Patuto on the Professor Joe Explains YouTube channel for a full extended interview on the Nancy Guthrie case. That interview has been referenced by Parade, AOL, and multiple news aggregators in the last 24 hours. His words have been shared tens of thousands of times across social media, and I want to give them to you in full, not clipped, not paraphrased, not filtered through a headline. This is his direct, on-the-record statement, verified across multiple credentialed news outlets. Matt Murphy said, "I will bet my bottom dollar that this guy, whoever he is, turns out to be a known dude in the jail of Pima County, and I would not be at all surprised." And this is based just on my own jaded lens. If this guy hasn't been a frequent flyer and released on some ridiculous social justice program, I would not be at all surprised to see it. I want to stay with that for a moment. I will bet my bottom dollar. That is not analyst language. That is not "we should consider the possibility" language. That is a man who has spent his career reading criminal profiles, reading institutional failures, reading the gap between what a case looks like and what it turns out to be, and putting his credibility behind a specific theory, a bet, his bottom dollar. Now let us pull the quote apart because every clause matters. A known dude in the jail of Pima County. That phrase has a specific meaning inside law enforcement. It does not mean someone vaguely associated with crime. It means someone who is already documented, already in the system. Someone who has been arrested, booked, fingerprinted, processed, possibly DNA sampled, depending on the nature of their prior record. A person whose identity is not a mystery to law enforcement because law enforcement has handled them before. A known dude, not unknown, known, just not yet connected to this particular case. A frequent flyer, that is the term used inside criminal justice for the person who cycles, who comes through the system, gets processed, gets released, and comes back. Sometimes on new charges, sometimes because a prior release went wrong. The person who has been in and out of Pima County Jail more than once, more than twice, the person the deputies and the booking officers and the prosecutors know by name. And then Murphy goes one layer deeper. He says he would not be surprised if this person was released through what he called a ridiculous social justice program. That is a pointed accusation directed at Pima County's pretrial release and repeat offender policies. Murphy is not making an abstract policy argument. He is saying this is the kind of case where the system lets someone out who should not have been let out, and that person, freed by a system that did not adequately weight the danger they posed, went and did something like this. Murphy then turned his fire directly at the people running that system. He called the investigation a clown show, not the investigation in general. He named names. He named Sheriff Chris Nanos. He named Pima County Attorney Laura Conover, two of the most senior officials responsible for the criminal justice machinery of Pima County, named by a former prosecutor who spent his career inside that same machinery in a different county and called out publicly as the people presiding over a clown show. When a former prosecutor names a sitting sheriff and a sitting county attorney by name on camera, that is not recklessness. That is deliberate. Murphy knows exactly what he's doing when he puts those names in that sentence. He is placing responsibility. He is saying, these are the people who built the environment that this case is operating inside. These are the people accountable for how that environment functions. And he is saying it is not functioning. And then after the clown show, after naming Nanos, after naming Conover, after betting his bottom dollar, Murphy said this. I want you to hear this one slowly. The Guthrie family deserves a lot better. 5 words, not a policy argument, not an institutional critique, a moral statement from a man who has watched families walk into courtrooms at the worst moments of their lives, who has seen what it looks like when the system works for them and what it looks like when it fails them. The Guthrie family deserves a lot better. And what Murphy is saying, embedded in those 5 words, is that they are not getting it. Now let us put this all together because this is what we have been building toward for the last hour. Ashley Banfield's contractor investigation says the suspect may have had professional access to Nancy's neighborhood. The process of tracking those workers is a mess. Law enforcement may have already spoken to this person without knowing it. The flower pot staging says this was someone who knew the property, not a stranger, someone who had been close to it before. The DNA evidence says there is non-family, non-household DNA recovered from the scene. A glove is in a lab in Florida. That DNA has not yet been run through the full CODIS pipeline because of a routing decision that sources say created unnecessary delay. The FBI's suspect profile says this is a male 5'9 to 5'10 with an average build who came armed, masked, and prepared, and who neutralized cameras before making entry. And Matt Murphy, former Orange County prosecutor, betting his bottom dollar. Says the person who did this is a known dude in the Pima County jail system, a frequent flyer, someone who has been in and out, someone who may have been released through a program that did not hold them accountable for who they were and what they were capable of. If Murphy is right, then the DNA in that Florida lab may already be a match waiting to happen. The person who took Nancy Guthrie may already be in a database. Their fingerprints may already be on file. Their booking photo may already be in a system. And someone, somewhere in that pipeline between a private lab in Florida and the CODIS database that the FBI uses to solve crimes, may be sitting on an answer that this family has been waiting 61 days for. That is what Murphy is saying when he bets his bottom dollar. Not just that the suspect is known, but that the system, the same system that named Nanos, that named Conover, that released this person on what Murphy calls a ridiculous social justice program, and is the reason we do not have an answer yet. The system is being asked to account for itself on April 7th under oath. And the question is whether it will. Here is where we are on day 61. April 2nd, 2026. Savannah Guthrie is returning to the Today Show on April 6th. She told Hoda Kotb in an emotional interview, "I want to smile, and when I do, it will be real, and my joy will be my protest." She said she does not know if she will belong there anymore. She said she is going to try. On that same day, April 6th, former Pima County Deputy Travis Reynolds will appear in court for his preliminary hearing on the kidnapping charge. On April 7th, Sheriff Chris Nanos is expected to face the Pima County Board of Supervisors. Under the authority of Arizona Revised Statute 11-253, the board has the power to compel him to answer questions under oath about his conduct and his department. If he refuses to comply within a legally specified window, they can vote to declare his seat vacant. He has said he will comply. What he says when he is actually sitting there under oath in front of a board that has called his career fraudulent and his deputy organization has voted unanimously to remove him. That is something we do not yet know. The recall effort continues. 122,000 signatures, July 10th deadline. The DNA is in a pipeline. The glove is in a lab in Florida, working its way back through Arizona's state system before it can reach CODIS. The contractor canvas is, by a source's own word, a mess. The investigation is now in its third month with no public suspect, no arrest, and no confirmed public breakthrough. And a former prosecutor has gone on camera, by name on the record, verified across multiple credentialed outlets, and said that he will bet his bottom dollar the person who took Nancy Guthrie is a known dude. A frequent flyer, someone already in the Pima County system, in the jail. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. She is 84 years old. Her daughter is going back to work because she says joy will be her protest. Her family has offered $1 million for the truth. They recorded video messages for the person who has their mother. They said they are ready to talk. They should not have to be the ones still waiting. And yet on day 61, they are. I want to say something before I let you go. This case has drawn a lot of voices. Some of those voices have been credentialed and careful. Some have been reckless. Some media outlets have named people who are innocent. The family has considered legal action. The sheriff has called reporters Monday morning quarterbacks. And through all of it, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The argument is not about the voices. The argument is about her. She is the reason this case gets a video 5. She is the reason it will get a video 6. And until there is an answer, we are going to keep building the picture as carefully and as accurately as we can. If you have any information about this case, any detail, any memory, any name, anything you saw in that neighborhood that felt off, any connection you made that you have not reported, please contact 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's non-emergency line at 5203-514-900. The reward is over $1 million. Someone out there knows something. That someone may be watching this right now.